It's Annette here, and I'm chatting with Dr. Malcolm Dunjey, a mission doctor and author with so much incredible wealth of knowledge to share and stories. And today we're going to be talking particularly about God's guidance. And I think you're the perfect person to talk to about this, because God has guided you to work amongst cannibals and in really dangerous situations. And so I'd love to hear, first of all, tell us a bit about your story, your faith journey, what brought you and your wife into mission work.
Yeah, we from the earliest time, age 15, the mission stories of people like Hudson Taylor and so on really captivated me, and it was one of the things I wanted to do. And we were always looking for God's guidance into directing me into that. And I suppose it came as a bit of a surprise. It took me till age 40 for that to actually happen, after extensive preparation, really. I mean, 20 years of preparing me to be in the spot where I could be a doctor and an ordained pastor with experience in tropical countries. It's sort of God's preparation went into getting me to the point where I was able to receive that first call, which was to Bangladesh in its post-famine, post-war situation where things were really terrible, and then to have God's call to sort of realise my expectation of the years and to have such a definite call was quite remarkable.
Mm. And so throughout your life, throughout your mission work, you've talked about in your books God's guidance and how you've known when he was sending you out to somewhere, and especially to places where most of us would feel very uncomfortable and not want to be called to. Can you give us a couple of examples of where you've sought God and his guidance to do something or go somewhere, and you've experienced that?
Yeah, I think starting at the beginning of our calling, the call to Bangladesh was quite remarkable, because by the time I had turned 40 and we'd come back from Papua New Guinea, I think the call was that I had experienced initially back at age 15, with the weight of years, I think that call had, there's some diminution of that call. It was sort of, our 3 teenage children were in high school, and life was different. And then slowly a bit of that call started coming back, and we were invited to a meeting where Bangladesh was put up as something big for us to think about. The next dramatic thing that happened was the next morning there was a church newspaper was delivered with Doctor Wanted in Bangladesh in letters, inches high. And for me, that was totally remarkable. It was really a fleece type call. So that for us, that was definite, because the difficult things were then to start, which is our children had to be dispersed into 3 different countries in order for us to do that. And I've often thought I would tend to advise people against responding to mission calls when they're in their 40s with teenage children, because the problems of trying to settle them are difficult. And for us, 3 different countries, so that was a big hurdle, but it was a big call, and for me it was very clear and very definite.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know in one of your books you talk about feeling called to Yemen, and this was just after some shootings and missionaries were fleeing Yemen. So it was that you were being advised not to go. And how did you know at that point that God was calling you there, despite what people around you were saying and despite what the news was telling you?
Yes. Well, when we first heard it, that here were these 3 missionaries who'd been killed, and we had already been in Yemen 7 years previously. We'd already learned some Arabic, and I'd been working in Aden as a doctor in the church clinic. So we had that behind us. We'd had to go back to Perth for my surgery. And so 7 years later, these missionaries are shot and killed. So our immediate thought, automatic thought was, hey, maybe that's something we should be looking at. And so we spoke to this friend who'd been evacuated, and he said, oh no, don't think of going back there. It's so chaotic. There's a mass evacuation of all of these missionaries belonging to the Southern Baptists. And, you know, it's a dangerous place. Don't go there. And in my mind, I dismissed it. But Audrey, my wife, said, no, we've got to pray about this and think about, you know. And so a couple of days later, this friend whom we'd spoken to rang back and said, hey, I regret what I said to you. I've since spoken to the people back in Yemen, including a missionary who stayed, and they want you to come. And furthermore, they're looking for a pastor as well as a doctor. They said they actually want two people.
Wow.
So we were able to say, hey, that's me. I've had both of those, that's part of my experience and my qualifications. So we then, within a few days, really, we'd got government approval to go there and visas. And within a couple of weeks, we were in Yemen. And so we regarded that as being another example of hearing a very clear call, which was, it was authenticated in other people who had to change their opinions and so on. So for us, once again, that was a very clear and definite call.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, you spent some time in PNG amongst cannibal communities,
Yes.
and you went there knowing that there's a very good chance that you could be lunch. And so, what gave you peace about being there, and maybe a story or two from your time with the cannibals?
Yes. Well, we went to Papua New Guinea in 1966. It was I'd just finished medicine. 6 years and a year of compulsory residency. So but I had to serve 6 years because I'd had to get a government cadetship for financing the last 3 years of the medical course. So I had to give 6 years back to Papua New Guinea. So that was a must. And we found ourselves in this, perhaps the most primitive part of Papua New Guinea, which happened to be the only place left where they were still cannibals. And there I was. And so I tried to get myself onto all the patrols that I could. It was my district, my territory. I had to know it. I had to provide the health services for the people. So I joined these first initial patrols into these cannibal people. And lo and behold, yes, they were cannibals. And it was uncontrolled. The government couldn't control the murders and the cannibal, what was happening. So it was a fantastic out of this world experience. And in fact, I went back for another patrol a year later to the same people. So yeah, and in terms of call, well, yes and no. It was part of the other thing that happens in mission and call is that the ordinary also happens. Ordinary people mostly go to do things as part of normal common sense things without the police situations occurring. We've been lucky, is probably the wrong word. We're lucky in the very clear confirmations, authentication of the calls that we've had. But for Papua New Guinea, it was part of our discharging a debt to the government. They'd paid for half my medical course. So I went. I was fortunate, if that's the right word, to be there at that part of their history when they were still cannibals. Now, one of the remarkable things, which I touch on in my book, one of my books, is that 2 years after I was there, a missionary family with 5 children, against all advice, went to live amongst these cannibals. I mean, people just regarded it as being absolute moral stupidity for that family to have done that, but they did it, and they lived there up until recently amongst these people, and the entire tribe has become Christian.
Wow.
And for me, it's an example of Christ triumphant, to see this these cannibal people. You know, I've got photos of them around our camps, threatening with their arrows and bows and so on. And I've got a collection of their stone clubs they used to hit people on the head with before eating them. So that was another remarkable thing. But the remarkable thing is, since then, in terms of people tempting God, I guess a lot of people would have thought for this missionary couple to take their family of 5 young children to live with the cannibals who were pretty much unrestrained was a remarkable act of stupidity, of tempting God. But he felt strong, they felt strongly about it, and they did it, and their children have survived, and the tribe is now Christian. The tribe has just finished building their high school for the children. So those things are quite remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess there's the two sides of the coin. So sometimes the call can be very obvious, and it can actually be an obligation, as it was for yourself going into to work with those tribes. And then there's those who have that sacred call of God on their lives, that they just know that that's where God wants them to be. And, despite all the best advice. And so I suppose that there are probably people watching who are standing at a crossroads right now, whether it's something as dramatic as a career, marriage, a life choice that's presented to them. And, they're wanting to know what God's will is for them. What would be your advice to them?
Obviously, I think that the number one thing is prayer. People have to talk with the Lord and talk things through, so that prayer, constant prayer, and for us, from age 15 to age 40, which is 25 years, my call was deferred, if you like, for 25 years, and the prayer during that time gradually sort of faded out until something happened at age 40 to make us start to reconsider. But prayer, I think, is the basic thing. Talking to God about it. That's number one. I never asked for the police type situations. I have to say Audrey, my wife, was very keen and it worked for her twice dramatically in her, because she wanted to not just to be sharing in a joint call to both of us, she wanted her own call as a wife on top of. And that's what she got each time. So my hat off to her. I didn't ever think that I should go down that track. She did, and she was rewarded by a separate call to 2 countries. So the first thing is prayer. The second thing is asking God to demonstrate in some way that this is what He wants to do. I think getting advice from people is good. In the case of us getting back to Yemen the second time, the first advice was don't go. So you can trust friends to a certain extent. The second advice was a few days later when he said, I'm sorry, I said that. So that once again was was quite meaningful for us. So advice from friends and the prayer and the weighing up of the pros and cons. For us to go out to Bangladesh meant dispersing our 3 children to 3 different countries. That was painful and it's still difficult to talk about. But we felt at the time that was God's call to us, and so the pros and cons have to be weighed up carefully in any person. So prayer, talking to other people, weighing up the pros and cons. Jesus' story about thinking about building towers and so on. You've got to look at at the pros and cons. What do things mean, and what are the financial implications? You know, do I put money on a house to pay it off while I'm overseas? Those sort of practical considerations are really important.
Yeah, yeah. So stepping forward, not just, you know, stepping out without any thought, but actually really prayerfully and logically considering the implications of your decision.
Yeah, I think the logical, looking at the logicality of the situation is really important. So for Audrey and me in Yemen the second time, knowing that we could die at any moment.
Yeah.
That was reality. We had the friends all around us. We had the government would give us this truck with a machine gun in it to help us go shopping. So there was total support, but we knew at any time a Muslim extremist could arise and shoot us. So we had that constantly in the back of our minds. We knew that was, but we also felt that God was calling us to that. That was his call. That was Jesus saying all authority in heaven and earth. And that was, that made the call secure for us.
Yeah, yeah. When you've counted up the cost.
Yes,
and your eyes are on the eternal reward, and for, not just for yourselves, but for those lives that you've impacted because you said yes.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Dunjey. And I'm going to put up a link to where you can purchase Dr. Dunjey's books and read articles and blogs about him and follow his story. So thanks again, Dr. Dunjey.
Thanks, Annette.